All right, hello and welcome to the video lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be solving the GET request challenge. And in this challenge, we're going to be diving in a little bit more to get started working with HTTP. And as we walked through in the previous challenge, we went over some of the details of HTTP and networking. And just to recap that briefly, the basic idea is that when you're browsing the internet or when you're building websites or web applications, it's extremely likely that you're going to have to be fetching data and resources from other servers and other services that are on the internet. And all of that communication is asynchronous, and it largely runs on top of the HTTP protocol. So HTTP is basically a protocol for sending and receiving information on top of the internet. So for example, we've deployed this server here at this URL, and you can see the code for that on our GitHub. I believe we have linked to that right here. So you can check out the code for this server right here. If you are interested, all of the details are in this source folder in this app.ts file. This is the entire code for the server. So this is a TypeScript application, and it is running somewhere on some computer in the world. So that server is out there running somewhere. And so if we go and we visit that server, which is deployed at this URL, we have that right here, we will see that we get back this page in a browser that says pairwise example HTTP API is online. And so what happens when we load this URL is that the browser handles using HTTP to make a request to this URL, and then our server, which is running and is online ready to handle requests at that URL, receives the request and it responds to it. And so it's actually receiving the request at this index route right here, and it's sending back this string of text, pairwise example HTTP API is online. And of course that is what we are seeing right here. So the browser makes this HTTP request to that server, and it receives an HTTP response which comprises this text, and then the browser renders that text on the page for us. So this is very simple. In this case, we are just sending back this plain string of text. But in other cases, when you visit, for example, GitHub or the pairwise workspace or some other website, a server actually returns an HTML document, which then has some links to other resources like JavaScript code or CSS, and the browser then handles loading all of these resources and then displaying the page that you see in front of you. And so what we're getting at here is basically underlying all of these operations is this fundamental protocol of HTTP, which is allowing you to send and receive this data. And so the browser is basically a tool which lets you make HTTP requests to servers, and then the browser also handles parsing and displaying the resulting data for you to see and interact with. So that's very useful, but what we want to do in these lessons is we want to make HTTP requests ourselves using code. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to make an HTTP request to this same server that we have been looking at, this one right here. We're going to do that, but we're going to do it in code. So we have this function body kind of set up here, const get request. So we want to fill in this body of the function to return the text from the response of making a GET request to the /API route at this URL. So if we come back to our deployed server here and we visit the /API route and we enter that, we will see that this is going to load and the text here is going to change to got a GET request. And that's because one of the fundamental ideas of HTTP is you are making requests to resources at a particular path. So these URLs essentially represent a unique path for a resource. And this URL here, /API, is different from the path when we didn't have the /API. And if we look back at the server code, we will see that we have these multiple different endpoints set up. So we have app.get / and this is the index route. And then we have another GET request set up, app.get /API. So this is the /API route handler. And this, of course, returns a different response. So when we visit the page here at /API, this first handler doesn't do anything, but instead this second handler is it matches the request, and so then this is what is activated and sends a response. So in our challenge here, we want to be making that GET request. We want to make this GET request to /API. And as we kind of previewed over here, there are multiple different HTTP methods, such as get, post, put, patch, and even delete. And we need to come back and fix the highlighting of this. And so these different HTTP methods basically refer to different types of operations that you can perform. And so we will get into some of the others in a bit, over here, post, put, delete, and so on. But for now, we're starting with the GET request. And the GET request, the GET HTTP method, is essentially saying, get me the resource at this path, or fetch me the data or the resource at this path. And so in our case here, we're basically going to make a GET request, which is going to fetch the data at this path, and then we want to return the text from the response. All right, so that's I think about enough in terms of introduction. Let's go ahead and dive in and actually do this. So first of all, because we are going to be making an asynchronous network request, we want to go ahead and put a try-catch block here, because this could always fail. And we probably will mention this a few times, but just try to remember as a very good kind of rule of thumb, whenever you're dealing with a network request or making some kind of asynchronous request, it's always a good thing to think, what if this fails? Because there's a chance that under some conditions, for some reason, it could fail. So it's useful to think about what will you do when it fails, and the easiest way is to just go ahead and set up a try-catch block at the very beginning. All right, so we want to make a GET request to that URL. So let's go ahead and say const URL is going to be equal to this URL here. If I can highlight it, and of course with /API. All right, and then we want to go ahead and get a response by calling await and then calling the fetch, the built-in fetch method. And so the fetch method, of course, which we have previewed over here, is going to allow us to make an HTTP request. All right, so we can call await fetch, and we need to pass in an input URL. So we can pass in our URL like this, and the default behavior for fetch is if you pass in a URL like this, it's going to go ahead and make a GET request for you. So this will make our GET request for us and give us our response. Now, the response that you get here is a little bit interesting. So feel free to read through this and see some more details about it. Here we go, response. So let's go ahead and click this. And so the response is going to have these various pieces of information on it, like headers, this OK Boolean, which represents whether or not the response was successful, some other stuff such as the status and status text, some headers, and we will see some more about these different pieces of data in the next few challenges. But what we're interested in is the actual data. So you'll see we have this body property, a simple getter exposing a readable stream of the body contents. Okay, that looks interesting. Let's keep looking through here. All right, so we have all these methods on top of the body. So body.form data, body.json, body.text. And so what happens is when you get this response, so let's just move this over. We are basically right here where we have this response and we want to get the text from this response. And so it turns out that depending on the type of the response, you're going to have to call a different method on the response. So if the response returned JSON data, you will need to call this .json method. And otherwise, if it returned plain text, like in our case, this is just returning plain text, then you'll need to call this .text method. So we want to go ahead and do that, and we can say text is equal to response.text. And if we hover the .text method, we'll see that this actually returns a promise. So we want to, of course, await that as well, and then we want to return the text here. And I'm just going to go ahead and return an error occurred in case we get an error. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and run the code and see how we're doing. Run, and we will see that we have passed the tests. And just so you believe me, let's go ahead and rename this to demo, come down here, and I'm going to call this function, and then we're going to just log out the text right here, result text. So let's go ahead and see that, and you'll see, here we go, got a GET request at /API. So here is our text, which we are also seeing right here. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up this slightly longer video, and the main takeaways here are just to get a basic understanding of HTTP and making network requests using code, using the fetch API, and then parsing the responses. And of course, all of this is asynchronous, so we have our nice async function here, and we're having to await a few different methods that we're using here. And that is basically it. So with that, we're going to wrap up this video, and we will see you in the next challenge.